Steve Jobs, Elon Musk were both jerks. At Harvard, you have a technical term that begins with an A to describe those type of people.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Context Window. My guest today is journalist and famed biographer Walter Isaacson. He's a Harvard alum who's written biographies of Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, and more recently, Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, and Elon Musk. I ask him, how many of these geniuses would have been admitted to Harvard today? I think you'll be interested in his answer. His new book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, is also a biography, not of a person, but of a document, the Declaration of Independence, and more specifically, its famous second sentence. It's an incredibly timely book as we approach the 250th birthday of the United States of America. Walter and I talk about why we hold these truths is the greatest sentence ever written, where the founders fell short in living up to their own words, and his status report on this grand experiment of a nation founded on a set of ideals, how it's going, where it's headed, and what he's most worried about. He also explains why he makes all his students use AI in the classroom, and how education and journalism can adapt to the changes to come. This was a really special episode, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Email me at david@thecontextwindow.com and enjoy the show. Walter Isaacson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's a real honor.
So you came to Harvard in 1970, is that right? And you were a history and literature concentrator. You wrote for the Lampoon, and you were president of the Signet Society, which is a literary society. So did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
No. In fact, I didn't know you could be a writer. I met a mentor of mine, Walker Percy. In fact, if you look over that shoulder, that's an old picture of me and Walker Percy, the novelist, whose daughter I knew quite well. He lived across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans. We'd go, fishing and hunting at the Bogafalaya, the bayou where they lived. And I kept saying, "What's your dad do?" And she said, "Well, he's a writer." And I knew you could be an engineer like my dad, or a fisherman, or a doctor. I didn't know. But so I sat at the knee of Walker Percy, and he explained to me that there were two types of people who came out of Louisiana: preachers and storytellers. He said, "For heaven's sake, be a storyteller. This world's got far too many preachers." And so I ended up being mesmerized by the magic of storytelling.
And I imagine that that love grew when you were at Harvard because of all the experiences you had. Did you know then you wanted to be a biographer?
No, but I'll tell you a story that I just ran into Doris Kearns Goodwin 2 days ago, and we joke about it. She says I embellish it a bit, but there's a kernel of truth to it. She taught a course at Harvard when she was Doris Kearns, American Presidency. I took it, and she was not a tenured professor. She was filling in for Dick Neustadt. And she finished her dissertation and published it, and it was called Lyndon Johnson and the American Dream. It was basically biographical. And the Harvard government department denied her tenure. She didn't get tenure because what she had done was biographical. And in the academy back then, they looked down on biography as being a distortion of history, sort of the great man theory of history. And after Doris got denied tenure for having written a biography as her thesis, people in the academy moved away from doing biographies. You can talk to Drew Gilpin Faust about that, because she had done one, but then does The Civil War Dead. And it left the field of biography a little bit open to us non-academics. David McCullough, Doris Kearns Goodwin, eventually, Robert Caro, and then a later generation of John Meacham and myself. And so for a long time, biography was out of favor at university.
Well, I guess that was to your benefit, and we do make some mistakes here at Harvard once in a while. You were the biographer of Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, two of the great geniuses of our time. And you got to decide how history would remember them, which is quite a responsibility. So how did that change you, that process of embedding with them and knowing that you were going to write about people who were important in history, and that, the way you interpreted them and their lives was going to be written about in the history books? How did it change you?
Well, one of the things it did was that, as we said, biography was out of favor.
Yeah.
And Henry Kissinger once said that when he was at Harvard, he was taught that history was made by great forces. And then he said, but when I see it up close, I see the difference people make. And so by being able to just spend time at the side of Steve Jobs for 2 years, day after day, night after night, I could see how his fingerprints touched the surface of history and put out ripples. Likewise with Elon Musk. Now, we biographers know that we distort history a little. We make it seem like a guy or a gal goes into a garage or a garret and a light bulb moment happens. And, in real life, we know creativity is a collaborative effort. Innovation is a team sport. And so I've written some books, like The Innovators was one of them, about teams that really create innovation. But seeing Steve Jobs up close and frankly, Elon Musk, I realized two things. Humans can really make a difference. I mean, this SpaceX doesn't happen. The iPhone doesn't happen if you don't have a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk. Secondly, you realize people are complex. These people, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, were both jerks. At Harvard, you have a technical term that begins with an A to describe those type of people. And I have to do it when I teach my students at Tulane or when I learned it at Harvard. Remember that people are complex, history's complex, that Shakespeare teaches us that even our heroes like Henry V, he kills all the French prisoners. They have dark sides, and even our villains like Iago or Shylock have a backstory. So I try to understand that people are complex, and I try to do what Dr. Percy told me, which is let me tell you a story. I don't try to preach about these people.
I imagine that one of the important talents with being a great biographer is piercing through the self-flattery, the flattering story that people want to tell about themselves to understand the real truth. So what is the self-flattery involved in the biographies of some of the men that you've written about recently, Musk and Jobs and others? And then if I were writing a biography of you, Walter Isaacson, what would be the self-flattery that I would have to pierce through?
Yeah, on my own case, I realized there were certain things I don't do particularly well. I used to think I had a good trait, which we call empathy. And I used to think, okay, Steve Jobs didn't have that. He didn't really give a hoot about it. And Musk, boy, he was almost had the opposite of the empathy gene, real bully types. One of the things that Musk said to me is like, okay, you take a great pride in the fact that you care about other people, because I'd be asking him, how can you treat people this way? He said, but sometimes empathy is just vanity. You care too much whether people like you. Now, as a dean at Harvard, you know that that can be difficult if you try to make everybody happy. And he said correctly that I was not very good at running CNN because I was just trying to make everybody love me, and I screwed up running the network. So in some ways, I think at a certain stage in life, you become a little bit more aware of your strengths and weaknesses. I don't think I was ever a truly great manager or executive, even though I had to run big organizations. And I try to keep that in mind when I write about other people.
One interesting thing about what you just said about empathy is that sometimes to be a great leader, you need to have empathy, but be willing to overcome it in order to get something done, to be a jerk, as you say. So do you think that Steve Jobs and Elon Musk have empathy and can just overcome it, or they don't have it in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Let me process it. But what I would say is it's different, the two of them. Steve Jobs had really good emotional receptors. He had a high EQ, an ability to understand what made somebody tick, a real feel for human emotions, which is why he invented things like the iPod and the iPhone that connected technology to human emotions. He was somebody, though, who understood that he sometimes had to overcome, to ignore his empathy, his ability to know that he was causing people pain. He said, I can't afford to have beat players on my team. So even though I know, and he was very good at knowing how people feel, he could towel snap you emotionally and make you happy, make you sad, whatever. Elon Musk, on the other hand, his brother once said, Kimball, his brother once said, I'm the one who got the empathy gene. Elon Musk is almost not of this planet born, in the sense that he seems like a cyborg. He seems like somebody who thinks of himself as an avatar in a video game, or he's playing a shoot-up game, or Polytopia, where empathy is not your friend. And I don't think that he truly understands or deeply feels other people's human emotions, which means he's really great at engineering. But when he takes over a company like Twitter, which involves human emotions, he's not as good at that as he is at designing the Raptor engine.
And you embedded with these folks for 2+ years, which is a great way to get texture. And maybe this was obvious to you from the beginning, his lack of empathy. But you learn so much about somebody's life that way, but it also threatens compromising your objectivity. And I'm sure you know that. And so I'm curious, what strategies do you use or habits of mind to try to make sure that you're looking at somebody's life objectively? And how do you know when maybe you're close to the line?
Well, sometimes you like a person a whole lot. And that happened when I wrote about Jennifer Doudna, for example, who did the gene editing technology called CRISPR. And the book is about her race with some people which is, sort of the Harvard MIT crowd, Fong Zhang and others who are David Liu, who are also doing it there. And perhaps my book shades a little bit more towards favoring her role.
Yeah, everybody loves an underdog.
Yeah, although I'll say the Nobel Prize Committee ended up on that side as well. But maybe that's just because I really, really liked her. Now, in the case of Elon Musk, I spent a lot of time embedded with him. I had an Airstream trailer in Boca Chica, Texas, right in his, driveway almost, where I spent morning, noon, and night with him. But there was not a big emotional connection that I had with him. It wasn't like I woke up every morning saying, I really like him. I felt objective. I felt like a reporter. I felt like I could just tell the story. And I wasn't trying to please him. You got to keep in mind, it's all about the reader. It's not about the subject.
Yeah, so actually when the subject is a little bit of a jerk, it makes it easier to be objective.
It definitely does. And you'd see him do things and you'd say, okay, this is not my pal. And you draw some line somewhere. I'd go out to dinner when he was with his then girlfriend Grimes or Siobhan or whoever, and you'd be with his group and talk. But if they were going to go out and party and it was just a pure party, that's, I'd say, all right, I'm not a social friend. I'm there with my notebook taking notes.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because of the geniuses that you've profiled, several of them didn't score well on traditional academic credentials. But I guess my question is, a lot of these folks are, definitely highly accomplished, are the kinds of people that a place like Harvard would have wanted to claim credit for after the fact. But do you think they would have been admitted? How many of the geniuses you profiled would have been admitted to a place like Harvard based on their traditional credentials? And what does that say about our admissions process?
Well, I love the fact that Albert Einstein twice got rejected at the Zurich Polytech. I've always wanted to ask Bill Fitzsimmons to figure out who was that admissions director of the Zurich Polytech that turns down Einstein. He finally goes there. And likewise, as you say, the people I write about were geniuses, but they were not necessarily conventionally smart. Bill Gates, who did get into Harvard, had a mental processing power and conventional smarts that far outstripped that of Steve Jobs. But Steve Jobs, in some ways, may have been more of the genius because, as he would say, he could think different. He was the crazy one, the misfit, the rebel, the one who thought out of the box. And I think that ability to be quirky and think out of the box, it even was true of Einstein. He may not have been as conventionally smart, let's say, as Henri Poincaré, who's also trying to do relativity theory. But Einstein makes that mental leap that maybe time is relative and speed of light's always constant. Peter Gallison at Harvard writes about this so well. What was that mental leap? And so I love Harvard, particularly having mentioned Bill Fitzsimmons, because it's not simply looking for whose conventional SAT scores are the highest. Somebody like an admissions director or vice president like Bill Fitzsimmons, looks for the different sparks. Who's going to be the yo-yo ma, who, I happen to go to school with. And it's not simply about conventional measures of IQ or processing power.
So, Walter, I want to ask you about your most recent book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, which is, you claim, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why is that the greatest sentence ever written?
It becomes a forcing mechanism for a new type of nation on Earth. Up until then, most nations were either ruled because of the divine right of kings or the sword of conquerors. But the notion that, as Lincoln said, you could have a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that under the social contract of that nation, there was an equality of rights, that created a new form of government. But obviously, when they wrote it, it was not true about the nation they had just formed. All were not equal rights. You had 1/5 of the people in the colonies were enslaved. You had women who didn't have the right to vote. But as I say, it becomes not a description of America, but a mission statement, an aspiration statement that becomes a forcing mechanism. When Lincoln said that about a nation conceived in liberty, it was 7 years after they wrote it. And it wasn't just that he was making a speech at Gettysburg. He was consecrating a cemetery in which 7,058 young people were buried because they had tried to make that sentence more true.
Yeah.
Likewise, the Seneca Falls Declaration giving rights to women, they invoked the sentence. Likewise, Martin Luther King invokes the sentence. Lyndon Johnson invokes it when he signs the Civil Rights Act. So I think it's a great sentence, not because it was correct, but because it pushed us to be more perfect, more correct.
Right. It was the antecedent for a lot of changes that happened later because of the ideals it espoused. So I want to ask
in this country and in this world.
Yeah, so I want to ask about that contradiction you mentioned. So as you said, I think it was many of the founders enslaved people. I think 43 of the 56 signers enslaved people. And what I found interesting about your book, and I knew this before, but you really made it very clear, was that many of them actually deplored slavery in their private writing, but of course enslaved people themselves and publicly didn't fight against it. So at some level, they knew it was wrong, but they lacked moral courage, as all of us do.
Absolutely.
And so my question for you is, what is something today that we all know is wrong, that we lack the moral courage to fight against actively, that people privately say is wrong, but don't have the courage to stand up to it?
Drew Faust, history I totally admire. We used to talk about when I was on Overseers and she was president of Harvard, that question, which is people at the time we're saying, let's rename this hall. Let's take Lowell's name off of Lowell House. Let's whatever it may be. And certainly at other places, there was much more of that. And she said, all of that is fine, but let's make sure we ask ourselves the question, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if my name is on a room or my portrait is in a hallway at Harvard, what are they going to say? We did wrong.
Yeah.
And we got totally wrong. And that maybe it was so bad they should take our picture down. Now, obviously, if we knew what it was, we would be a lot better. But we should ask ourselves, all right, burning fossil fuels, will that end up being something that becomes so appalling that, people will be judged for it? Eating meat. And let me say, I'm not a vegetarian. I especially like fish, but also all meat. And here's the tricky one for you. And maybe we don't want to go too much into it. Abortion. 50 years from now, people will say, oh my God, you denied a woman's right to abortion? Take the picture down. Or maybe 50, 100 years from now, there'll be people say, that was, morally wrong. We should take people's pictures down. I know how I feel on a woman's right to choose, but I don't know if, I think we should all have some humility to think maybe we're getting things wrong today and understand. I keep quoting Shakespeare, but he said, even the best are molded out of faults. We all have our faults.
and to your point, I think we're surely getting things wrong today, but we don't know. The question is, the founders, and that's what's really striking about it, they knew. At some level, they knew. And so do you think there's something that people talk about in private circles now, in private writings, that we all feel is wrong, but we don't have the courage to stand up for it now? Is there something that stands out in your mind? You mentioned fossil fuels and eating meat. I think those are two good candidates. Anything else?
I think the issue of race and this is where you started with your question, for 250 years, has been a narrative for this country. And we also don't talk about it too much. We have trouble talking about it in public. I love living in New Orleans because I grew up in a racially integrated neighborhood. So many of my friends I grew up with and people I know now, my social circle is racially mixed. But I don't see that in other cities. Even when I go to Boston, I go to New York, whatever, still very segregated, and people talk differently about that. I would think that it would be useful. This doesn't mean I'm picking on the sin we got right or wrong, or whether DEI was an outrage or the greatest thing ever. I mean that we probably should learn to talk about race with people of different views and different backgrounds and different races a little bit better than we do, especially, as I may say, up in some cities. And what I try to do in my life with my friends in New Orleans is like, if there's something about race we got to talk about, let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. The book opens with a hinge point about the key beginning of the sentence, which is, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And you talk about that change from sacred to self-evident. So explain why that's important and who authored the change.
Yeah, that was a Benjamin Franklin change. Thomas Jefferson writes the first draft of the sentence. That first draft is in the flyleaf of my book, where you see Jefferson's, we hold these truths to be sacred.
Yeah.
And you see the printer's pen of Ben Franklin with backslashes and writing in self-evident. And Ben Franklin had been, I thought, well, that doesn't sound like Ben Franklin. He doesn't use highfalutin words. He would just use a word obvious. But no, he had spent time with David Hume, the greatest philosopher of the time, in Scotland in 1775. And Hume had come up with the notion of what we call Hume's four, of two types of truths, one based on evidence, like London's bigger than Philadelphia. And to know a truth based on evidence, you had to go find the facts, know the number of people in both states. Then there's another truth, which is a analytic truth, a self-evident truth. A truth by definition is a simple way to say it, which is like all bachelors are unmarried. To know if that's true, you don't need to go surveying bachelors and saying, do you got a wife? No, all bachelors are unmarried. The reason that's important is it's not empirically true that all people are equal. Some are taller, some are shorter, some are smarter, some are better at sports, some are better at whatever it may be. But it is self-evidently true that they're equal under the social contract that the Declaration is trying to say, which is we all come out of a state of nature. And that's where the sentence begins. We hold, just like the Constitution begins with the word we. That's John Locke's social contract theory. And so it is a truth based on logic and definition alone that if we are forming this contract, we all have equal rights under that contract. So Ben Franklin was good at that, because that whole narrative that we're talking about with race and slavery and everything else, his life is an example of the narrative. He had two slaves enslaved people working in his print shop when he was young, but he realized that at a certain point it's abhorrent.
Yes.
And he becomes an abolitionist, writing great papers on, and even the president of the Society for the Abolition of Slavery when he was in his 80s, which back then was considered old. And so you see his evolution. And I think we sometimes have to remember that people don't get it right, but you judge them on their moral evolution.
What did the founders mean by pursuit of happiness?
Every single document up until then talks about life, liberty, and property. That's the way John Locke has it in the second treatise.
Yep.
That's the way the Continental Congress in 1774 did a declaration of certain rights. That's the way the Virginia Declaration of Rights in June of 1776, written by George Mason, Jefferson's close friend. So why does Jefferson change it from the pursuit of property or the holding of property to the pursuit of happiness? And Jefferson, who deserved the musical more than Hamilton did not agree with Hamilton that private property and the economy was based on growth and wealth. He believed a good economy existed in order to have a good society, where each person got to choose their own aspirations, their own feelings of worth, whether it was acquiring property, whether it was making things, whether it was serving the good Lord, whether it was serving their community and fellow citizens. Each person got to define what the pursuit of happiness should be. And it's a breathing phrase, one that lives through 250 years. So each new generation can say, okay, how do we define it?
Right. And in some sense, if I hear what you're saying correctly, Walter, it's the right to pursue property or other means of happiness, not the guarantee of property, but the right to pursue it. Fulfillment. Exactly.
Yeah, we in New Orleans got to remember it's not happiness like the Mardi Gras parade getting there in time or the Saints finding a quarterback. It's a fulfillment. It's a as Plato would call it, an instantiation of the good life.
Yes, and it's a guarantee of the ability to pursue it, not that you actually achieve it.
Absolutely.
So do you think that's a hierarchy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Or is it three things that are on equal footing?
I think that that's a good question, and sometimes we have to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the order in which John Locke has it in the second treatise of government. It's the order it always was: life, liberty, and the enjoyment of their properties, or many different formulations. I think individual autonomy. When I was in college, way before the time of most people listening, I had two great philosophy professors at Harvard. I had John Rawls and I had Robert Nozick, and they both taught me John Locke in different ways. And indeed, you can look at Locke's philosophy of the question of why life is so essential, that the government you have your individual autonomy. He's trying to create the individual autonomy as the basis of all rights. And that then leads you to liberty. It's not about the good of the community at all times. It's about individual liberty. But when you have the pursuit of happiness, they're trying to lay the framework for the good life. And what John Locke teaches us, and John Rawls more than Robert Nozick emphasized, was what's called Locke's proviso, which is everybody has a right, because of their liberty, to take things out of nature, mix their labor, and call it their property. Yeah. But Locke has a proviso that says there must be as good and enough left in common. And that notion of putting things in the commons. When I came to college, I saw Boston Common. I saw the Cambridge Commons. I said, whoa, those are nice parks. Not as nice as Audubon Park, but they're nice. Then I realized they weren't parks. They were the common, where people who own the land in an era of disparities of wealth would put some land in common so that the people who didn't own land, who became known as the commoners, got to graze their herds there or bury their dead or plant there. So we put things in the common: police protection, fire patrol, healthcare, schooling, housing, maybe, whatever we want to say, that should be shared in common. Those are the debates we have. And John Locke, as you say, in that sequence, begins with the notion of individual liberty. But I think we in America come to the notion of saying, and it's a balance between what we have as individuals and what we decide to put in the commons.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, I think there's some people who think that is out of balance right now. So, for example, in your biographies of Jobs and Musk, it's very clear these are people who created fabulous wealth, who are great geniuses, and that maybe their pursuit of happiness has compromised the rights of others. Do you think that the pursuit of happiness is out of balance in America right now? Do you think we're focused too much on that and not enough on liberty, let's say?
Yeah, I wouldn't just say it's
not one or the other.
Right.
It's
No,
not
I
zero
wouldn't.
sum.
Yeah, it's not one or the other, but I also wouldn't say it's a problem that we can only blame on the billionaires.
Yeah.
I think we got to look at ourselves. One of the people I love at Harvard who took over the great course that John Rawls taught, which is a theory of justice, is Michael Sandel.
Yeah.
And he wrote not only The Tyranny of the Meritocracy, which is about you and me and people we know.
Yes, it is.
But he also wrote about the chipping away of the commons, which is, as Michael Sandel said, it used to be when we went to Fenway Park or we went to the ball game, we all went in the same entrances of the stadium. We sat in the same bleachers and ate the same soggy hot dogs and drank the same stale beer. Now we've got velvet ropes, we've got VIP entrances, and we have what Sandel calls the skyboxification of America. And all of us use our privileges to make sure that we don't necessarily have to rub elbows quite as much in the commons. And so I think we're chipping away at the commons. My father dropped out of Tulane his beginning of his senior year, and with his 5 best friends went to the ROTC building to enlist in the Navy because they didn't want to miss World War II. And my father got to serve with people of all sorts of different backgrounds, people who were like not born in Louisiana, which he never knew before. And that was a shared service and a shared commons we have. We don't have a shared sense of national service now. We don't have a shared sense that we all should stand in the same line, as E.B. White said. And so I think it's sometimes easy to blame the billionaires, but, you know, as you asked earlier in this, when we look inside ourselves, what are we getting wrong?
Yeah. You know, and that makes me think a lot about Benjamin Franklin, who you wrote a biography of and is clearly, you clearly like, and is clearly the hero of the greatest sentence ever written for his changes. And so I guess my question is, what do you think Benjamin Franklin would think of politics today and billionaires and what's happening? What would he say? What advice would he give us to right the ship if he would think it needs to be righted?
The essence of Benjamin Franklin and what he did for this nation was he was a unifier. He could take under his mulberry tree on Market Street in Philadelphia, he could take wild abolitionists and Thomas Jefferson together. And sometimes they made compromises. Franklin would say, you know, compromises don't make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. And sometimes they may have gotten it wrong, like compromising on the issue of slavery. Maybe that was wrong. But that's what Franklin was able to do. And what he would abhor is that our media, because he creates a newspaper in Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania Gazette, that is dedicated to finding common ground and printing pieces without respect to partisan or party or ideology. He would hate that our communication systems, our social media, our politics is geared to dividing us rather than uniting us.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're saying is it's not about getting all the answers right, it's that he was in process trying to be a uniter rather than a divider, and that was his goal, even if he didn't always land on the right issues at the right time.
Right, and that's why biographies are kind of good, in my opinion, because they're a narrative. They're a building woman. You start not knowing everything, and you hopefully get to know more and become wiser. That's also true of a nation. We have a narrative. We have a biography as a nation, and it's in fits and starts. But the question is, what are we learning? And is the arc of history bending in the right direction?
Yeah. You teach at Tulane now, and you tell all of your students that they must use AI. Why do you tell them that, and how do they use AI?
Well, I think if you aren't using the best tools available, you're going to be left behind. I teach a course with a computer science professor. We jointly teach it called The Digital Revolution from Ada to AI. Ada being Ada Lovelace. And what they have to do is a really big project about the history of the digital revolution. And not only do they have to use AI to create it, they have to use at least 3 different models of AI, you know, Anthropic or Claude, whatever, or OpenAI or XAI, whatever they want, ChatGPT. The project is divided into 2 parts. You describe each prompt, each process, each mistake you saw that was made, each way you dealt with it, the process, and then secondly, the final paper. And I say, you're going to be graded equally on both parts. You should show me exactly how AI worked and didn't work and the final project. But don't tell my students this. I mainly grade them, like 80% of the grade is on the first part, their description of how they stumbled and bumbled and blundered and also finally got it right using AI. Because if they don't know how to use it, they're not going to be able to compete for the jobs of the future.
And that's interesting. And when now you've done this a bunch now, you've seen a bunch of efforts of them to stumble and bumble around. What are they finding? What are the best uses of AI to learn how to write, to learn how to do what Walter Isaacson does?
Well, that's an interesting question, which will bring up a little project I've created, a little company I've created called Boswell and Company. And it's named after James Boswell, the greatest biographer of all time, does the life of Dr. Johnson. And what we do is take some of my students who are great, take my biography writing seminar, and some students who are computer science people, and we form teams, and they get paid to write biographies of people. People of some significance, people who may have started companies, but aren't big enough to have John Meacham calling them up and saying, I want to do your biography. And we have found that the AI can be enormously helpful in going through hundreds of thousands of documents and pieces of information and interviews that the person gave, and every story and every YouTube that, ever happened, and processing it and getting it in order. But it doesn't have the human touch of being able to write the thing. And I think AI keeps getting better, but it's still AI slop when it comes to the actual writing. So we insist, and I do it in my life, that every sentence that gets put on the page is typed by my own fingers, comes out of my own head, and has the emotions from my own heart. Because unless that's the case, it's not really a connection to human feelings. So the AI can do a lot. It can cut by half, maybe by 2/3, the amount of organizing work you got to do. But for example, we did some great industrialists who had gone to Ole Miss, and my student spent time going to Ole Miss games with them, talking to his brothers, hearing the tales of the youth. AI was very good at transcribing those things, getting all the facts right. But it had to be a real person with me editing it that said, okay, let's have a feel for this guy. What is it like? What's his relationship to his brothers? So I think we're always going to add the human emotional dimension, and the machines are always going to be better at processing the information.
I see.
We're going to be better at understanding the human emotions.
Well, so it's interesting because you're emphasizing the end of the process, which is I've got all this information, now I have to distill it into something that's a narrative, a story about someone's life. But it sounds like you're also saying that AI can't help as easily with the beginning of the story, which is somebody has to collect the information in the first place. So do you think...
Especially nowadays, I mean, if I'm doing a biography, maybe of Benjamin Franklin, and the 40 volumes of his papers are there and they can be processed, that helps. But somebody needs to report. Somebody needs to go to the Ole Miss game. Somebody needs to be in the trailer at Starbase watching Musk in the morning as he tries to figure out where the Raptor engine heat shield should be, and standing there looking at him doing it. And maybe 20, 40, 100 years from now, you'll have robots that can see and hear and feel and walk around. But no, they're not. And by the way, I doubt you'll ever get a robot who will go to an Ole Miss game. I mean, that's above and beyond even what AI can do. But no, being there and reporting. And this is why, by the way, a small plug here for one of my pet peeves is that the AI systems that are using all of the information gathered by humans, those who go to Iraq, or those who go to Afghanistan, or those who, by the way, just go to Starbase and take notes and write things, that's being used as training data for the AI systems. The people who do the reporting, and I'm well enough on in my career, I don't need to worry about it, but the next generation of reporters needs to know, hey, you get some royalties, you get some rights for the information that you reported.
Right, right. And, it's worth thinking about how we can avoid that problem of using AI to kind of eat the seed corn of journalism. It's sort of like, you don't have a good reward. If you don't have a reward to doing the reporting won't happen, and then the journalism will be less interesting.
And we see that today,
Yeah.
even before AI, the business models of
Yes.
journalism broke down with the internet and the fact that all information seemed to be free. So local newspapers quit hiring people like me coming out of Harvard, and I could go to the Times-Picayune and be part of a team of 12 that was covering City Hall. It's hard to justify that now
Yeah.
in the era of the internet, but even more so in the era of AI, unless we figure out a system where if you're there at every high school football game and every city planning commission meeting, your reporting is somehow compensated by the AI companies that train upon it.
Yep. I heard you say something interesting the other day about how the technology and education interact. And you were talking about the importance of universal high school and land grant colleges in developing, the U.S. economy. And the way I would think about it as a labor economist is say, before agriculture was mechanized, physical power was scarce. And so you needed enough power to run the farm, to grow enough food to feed your family and maybe sell it on the market. And then technologies like tractors made physical power abundant. And what was then scarce and valued in the economy was intelligence. And so we needed to develop an education system that mass-produced intelligence in the population to take advantage of the prosperity that we could unlock. But now intelligence is abundant. So the question is, now that intelligence is abundant, or if it's abundant in the age of AI, what's going to be scarce, and how should education change in the age of AI?
Well, you're right. I mean, we've been through this before in the 1890s, which was a period of much greater technology than today. I mean, we all of a sudden got electricity and cars and light bulbs and radio and phonographs and telephones, and it changed everything. And we moved to a knowledge economy. I won't necessarily call it an intelligence economy, from an agricultural one. And we created high schools that became universal and free in that period to deal with that. Now, the question is, what are we going to bring to the party in an era in which intelligence processing, let's call it, is abundant because of AI? Well, three things. One I've talked about, which is human emotional connections and creativity. You're always going to bring that, even with Boswell and Company. You're going to be the fingers who type that and understand the person. Secondly, you're going to be out there learning and gathering information in a way that, at least for the next 50 years, robots aren't going to be able to wander around and gather information. And then I also think that this notion of connecting the arts and the sciences, which is the intersection of creativity. That's what Steve Jobs said. As I said, Steve's intellectual processing power was not up there with Bill Gates, maybe, but he knew beauty mattered, and he had an emotional and humanities feel. He took poetry and calligraphy and dance when he was in college, not applied math only, as Bill Gates did. So I think that ability to see patterns across disciplines and to connect the humanities to technology will become more important. When I first started teaching history 5 years ago at Tulane, parents would come and say, "Boy, I'm glad my kid's taking your class, but I don't want him to major in history because I want him to learn how to code so they can get a job." Well, Claude will code better. Even the Harvard students will do it. But my history graduates, they get 2 or 3 job offers now. People need them. So we don't quite know what the jobs of the future, maybe you do, but you're an economist specializing in it. But we know that the jobs of the future are going to demand emotional intelligence, connecting the arts and the sciences, connecting creativity and the humanities to technology, and the ability to actually go out there and engage in the world.
That's a great advertisement for the value of a liberal arts and sciences education, Walter. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So a couple more questions about Harvard, if you don't mind, as we wrap up. So 8 Harvard alums signed the Declaration of Independence, including John Adams, Sam Adams, and of course, John Hancock. What was Harvard's role in the country's founding?
Well, it was the cradle in many ways of liberty and the cradle of resistance to the crown. And it's not, of course, just the 3 you mentioned. It was the Sons of Liberty, who it was the people organizing the Boston Tea Party and Paul Revere. It was that militias who went to Lexington and Concord, and Paul Revere who rode to warn them of the approach of the British. So the war starts there, and George Washington, a Virginian, ends up making his base camp in Harvard Yard, actually, because that's where this notion of rebellion starts. And secondly, you mentioned John Adams, a strong abolitionist, Massachusetts, Theodore Parker. I mean, he's the one who originally talked about the arc of history having to bend towards justice. These all come out of Boston. So there's a passionate core and a moral core that comes out of Boston and comes out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In some ways, Massachusetts should get a little bit more of its due, because we think of Jefferson as being and Washington as the indispensable founders, but Harvard was at the epicenter.
So, as you mentioned, Harvard was at the epicenter, and it's almost 400 years old, older than the country. And so as we approach this 250th birthday of the country that I know we both love, do you think, Walter, that Harvard is a force for good in the world? And how could it be better?
Oh, absolutely a force for good. And by the way, you said something. I was just reading a book about somebody who said that a country that I love, and talked about the patriotism. It was somebody on the left, actually, and said everybody was kind of aghast at that. And I think you said the right thing, which is no matter how you feel about everything from the narrative of slavery to the bombing of Iran, there's a sense that we should rally around at our 250th is we care about America, and indeed we even love it. And sometimes I think that in a zip code like Harvard's, we flinch a bit at saying the reason we get kind of excited and our hair on fire about a lot of these things that are happening is not because we hate our country, it's because we love our country.
Yes.
And I kind of think that if you went to, a meeting back in, I don't know, the Kirkland House Junior Common Room when you were there, or the University Hall for the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and you start talking about how much we love our country, there'd be a little bit of a flinching, a raising of eyebrows. And I think it's good on our 250th to say the reason we get worked up at times is we actually do care about the country, and we even love, maybe not what it always has been, but we love, as that sentence tells us, that aspiring sentence tells us, we love the narrative towards what it could be.
I agree with you. It is the greatest sentence ever written. Walter Isaacson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, this was interesting. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this.
Yeah.